Hello dear friends, I hope you're doing well. What is the main difference between a qualitative research design and a quantitative research design? Is there anything in one that makes it a better choice for a researcher than the other, and vice versa? What factors can determine the researcher's choice of this or that design? What are the main types of qualitative research design? This video exclusively reserved for the latter. A research design is a detailed, well thought out plan that informs the whole process, starting from the formulation of research questions and hypotheses, and objectives of course, through to data collection, data analysis, and ending with the interpretation. Researchers have traditionally distinguished between two types of designs, the qualitative and the quantitative. As is indicated in the title, this video is exclusively reserved for qualitative research designs, and in the next video I will talk about qualitative designs. Now, the main difference between the two is very simply that while a quantitative approach draws conclusions based on numerical evidence, based on numbers, a study couched within a qualitative research design, within a qualitative approach, is on the whole descriptive and relies on interpretation. It draws conclusions by using words rather than numbers. That's generally the difference between the two types of designs. To the question as to which of the two designs is better, the answer is neither. Both designs have their own strong points and they have their own limitations. We will try to expose this in the next video. Specialists in the field of research maintain that a quantitative research design guarantees objectivity, generalizability, but falls short of detail. It does not go deep in the analysis of a given experience, for example. After all, the numbers are somehow dry. Conversely, a researcher adopting a qualitative research design is one who can provide an in-depth analysis of the phenomenon under investigation. While a quantitative approach guarantees objectivity, as I said, a qualitative approach is one that is renowned for being subjective. I would like to open a bracket here. Some students understand subjectivity in the wrong way. By subjective, we do not mean biased. We do not mean that the researcher starts his project with an attempt to argue for something or to prove something. It's not that we believe in something, it's not that we were reared in a tradition that we need to gear our research towards the conclusions that we desire. This is not the subjectivity that is meant in this regard. Subjectivity means that the researcher bases his interpretation or her interpretation on his or her previous knowledge, previous experience, previous knowledge of the subject matter, previous knowledge of the society he or she is investigating. So it does not mean bias. This is a bracket just to clear the mist from the concept of subjectivity. And now we move to the factors that can determine the choice of this or that design. The most evident one is the expertise of the researcher. There are some researchers who would be more comfortable in a qualitative approach, but there are others who like the idea of using numbers, using statistical measures, providing numerical evidence. And this brings me to the other factor, which is the nature of our hypotheses, the nature of our research questions. Different hypotheses determine or impose on the researcher different designs. There are some research topics that are more amenable to a qualitative design. There are other topics that are amenable to a quantitative analysis. Another factor can relate to the resources available. Some students may not have access to data analysis softwares, for instance, and they may not have received enough training, so they decide to switch to a qualitative rather than a quantitative study. Of course, there are other factors like the tradition among the researchers in the field of investigation. There are some research topics that have specific research questions. They are recurrent among researchers in the field. There are some instruments that have already been validated, procedures that have been validated, so the researcher can get inspired from these researchers. And now, with this in mind, we would like to expose a brief taxonomy of qualitative research designs. Different authors report different types, but there is a common denominator, there is a common core. We can talk about 4 types of qualitative research designs: ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, and case study. So let's expose each of these types of qualitative research designs. Ethnography, or an ethnographic research design, which is a term that has roots in Latin, ethnos, which refers to people and cultural groups, and graphy, which means writing. So the term implies that the researcher involves a detailed description of the behavior of a cultural group. Generally, the researcher here is the participant, is immersed in a given community and tries to observe, the interactions, for example, the practices. He or she gets involved in conversations with the target community and their investigation. So this is what makes ethnography interesting. One of the advantages of an ethnographic research design is the rich and the varied nature of the data generated. This allows the researcher to fathom up the community and their investigation and provide and come up with a very deep understanding of the phenomenon he or she is investigating. The researcher has the further advantage of having a holistic grasp, as it were, of the phenomenon under investigation. And this perspective is what Firth and Wagner have alluded to in calling it an emic perspective, that is to say, a holistic perspective, and this is opposed to the etic perspective, which is monolithic and which is generally surface and does not guarantee any deeper understanding of the phenomenon being investigated. There are different areas in the field of applied linguistics and language education where the ethnographic approach can be exploited. As a case in point, when a researcher investigates issues relating to identity, culture, motivation perhaps, where the student has to be involved in some narrative, the ethnographic approach is a very interesting one. The researcher generally does what we call classroom observation and participates in the activities of students, etc., in order to obtain a general idea. This can also be done through interviews, through what is important is that there is this contact with the classroom community, for example, except that ethnography, like any other design, may have some shortcomings. While ethnography allows the researcher to have a lot of detail, a lot of data, as I said, there is this problem of generalizability. What applies to a given classroom is not necessarily what can apply to the other classroom. Some researchers may not be able to keep this distance, and there is the risk of bias in this regard. And now with the second qualitative research design, which is known as phenomenology. A phenomenological research design is one that is involved in providing a deeper understanding of human experience, and it generally involves the interpretation of meaning. One of the conditions that need to be observed among ethnographic researchers is that they need to keep their own interpretations away, and this process is known as bracketing. We interpret meaning only within the social and the cultural context of the phenomenon being investigated. And this is known as hermeneutics. This is a hermeneutic approach. For example, we want to describe the experience of individual students with a given pedagogical approach, for instance, pair work over a semester, or their experience with interacting with native speakers, etc. Just to wrap up this point, in a phenomenological research design, the researcher has to interpret his or her data within its cultural and social context. And of course, this analysis should not be informed by preconceived assumptions on the part of the researcher. The third qualitative research design to consider is one that is known as grounded theory. And as the term implies, grounded theory refers to a research design that aims to generate theories based on empirical data. That is to say, the theories and explanations of given phenomena are grounded in empirical data. So it is in a sense inductive, as it starts from data to the generation of a theory. This data set that is rich, can be coded on a step-by-step basis before generating a theory. In the process of generating a theory from the data, researchers agree on 3 basic steps, known as open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. Open coding is the initial interaction with the data. Here, the researcher, takes note of different key words. For example, he or she writes down key observations. These observations may not be organized, they may be like brainstorming. And then there is the other step, which is called axial coding. It's to try to match, for example, category 1, category 2, and conflate them into a broader category. And then the third step comes. It's when you bring these broader categories and form, theoretical construct out of them. So this is what we refer to as selective coding. So this is generally how a grounded theory design can work. A grounded theory design has the advantage of generating new theories and refining them and giving feedback on the theoretical proposals. And now with the last qualitative research design, which is known as case study. A case study research is one that attempts to provide an in-depth understanding of a specific individual, for example, or company or organization, institution, in its real-life context. This implies that a case study has to diversify the sources of information, to use many data collection instruments rather than 1 or 2. Here I would like to point out that there is a mistake common among so many students. There are students, for example, who administer a questionnaire at a given university, for example, and they assume that it is a case study. This is an utter misnomer. A case study is necessarily an in-depth analysis of what is considered to be the case under investigation. This diversity of research instrument, of data collection instruments, guarantees what we can call a true triangulation, because we diversify the sources of information in order to draw a conclusion that is valid. The aim here is to uncover the mechanisms, for example, that underlie the functioning of these cases that are otherwise hidden if we were to use other research designs. Thank you very much and have a nice time.